The chandeliers didn't shimmer. They breathed. Quietly, like they knew how to watch without being seen. Inside the Villaro private club, everything looked too perfect. Marble polished like frozen moonlight, silver cutlery catching reflections that didn't belong to anyone. It wasn't a place for mistakes, but that night, one happened, softly, fatefully, wearing red heels and trembling nerves. Alina Veras had come here chasing normalcy. A blind date her friend insisted on, a promise she made to herself that she'd try again. No past, no ghosts, just dinner. But normal was a language this place didn't speak. The maitre d' pointed her toward a table, far corner, candlelight flickering like a heartbeat caught between fear and curiosity. A man sat there already, poised, silent, a shadow stitched in an expensive suit. His presence didn't fill the room, it quieted it. And when his gaze lifted, the air around her changed shape. Alina thought he was the one she was supposed to meet, and he, maybe out of habit, didn't correct her. The silence stretched, elegant and dangerous, the kind that makes you aware of your own pulse. No names.
No introductions.
Only glances that felt too steady for strangers. The world around them blurred. Music softened. Waiters disappeared. Time bent. It wasn't attraction yet. It was gravity. Silent. Absolute. Inescapable. He studied her with a calm that bordered on cruel. Every gesture she made, the way her fingers traced the rim of the glass, the way her shoulders carried both grace and exhaustion, told him things she didn't mean to reveal. And she unknowingly began to steady under his gaze, as if his stillness anchored her. Somewhere nearby, the real man she was supposed to meet was waiting, at a different table, with a different candle, growing impatient. But by the time she realized it, the mistake had already rooted itself in something deeper. By the time she looked away, she had already met the one man who would change everything she thought she knew about love, control, and danger. When the confusion finally surfaced, a brief apology, an embarrassed exit, Dominic Rafe Moretti didn't move. He only watched her walk away, each step cutting through the polished silence like the end of a memory he didn't know he had. For most people, chance is just chaos with manners. For Dominic, it was prophecy. And for Alina, it was the beginning of a story that would unravel every safe version of herself she had ever built. That night, the city glittered beyond the club windows, towers of gold and steel reflecting 1,000 other stories. None of them would remember the woman in the red heels who sat at the wrong table, but one man would, and he'd remember her in ways the world wouldn't forgive. When Alina stepped outside, she didn't notice the car that followed her from a distance, or the name whispered into a phone seconds after she left. All she carried was the strange weight of a gaze she couldn't forget, the way it had lingered like touch without skin. Later that night, in a quiet apartment lit by half-melted candles, she tried to laugh at herself. Blind dates were disasters, she knew that. But as she washed the lipstick from her wine glass, her hand trembled slightly, as if her body remembered something her mind refused to admit, something alive, something dark, something inevitable. Across the city, Dominic sat alone in his study, a half-empty glass of bourbon untouched beside him. His men spoke softly in the background, reporting movements, deals, numbers, but he wasn't listening. His mind replayed the stillness of that moment, the stranger who didn't flinch under his stare, the mistake that didn't feel like one. He didn't believe in fate. But that night he ordered her name to be traced. Not because he was curious, because something inside him, quiet, old, and dangerous, had just woken up. And somewhere between mistake and memory, the story began to breathe. Morning came dressed in gold, but Alina felt none of its warmth. The city moved around her. People rushing, horns echoing, sunlight slicing between buildings, yet she carried a silence too heavy for daylight. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was something quieter, stranger, like remembering a dream that didn't belong to her. Her life had always been measured. Coffee before sunrise, metro by 7, 12-hour shifts at the gallery. Routine, predictable, safe. But safety was a fragile illusion. One broken table had already cracked it. She tried to forget him. The man with eyes that didn't blink, the way his stillness felt like gravity disguised as calm. But memory is never kind to those who pretend not to feel. And that night wouldn't leave her alone. By noon, his world had already found hers. Dominic Rafe Moretti didn't chase people. He studied them. He believed the most dangerous truths were the quiet ones. So when his men brought her file, fragments of a life too ordinary for his world, he didn't dismiss it. He looked closer. Her name, Her work, her neighborhood, every detail too simple, too clean, as if life had hidden her on purpose. He wasn't used to curiosity. Curiosity meant distraction, and distraction killed men like him. But Alina's mistake had left an echo, and he wasn't the kind of man to ignore echoes. That evening, when Alina left the gallery, the air carried a subtle change. A car engine somewhere hummed longer than it should have. A reflection in the window moved slower than the rest. Still, she told herself she was imagining it. The world was full of shadows. She just wasn't supposed to notice them. But the shadow that followed her was not ordinary. Dominic watched from a distance. Not because he needed to, but because he wanted to see if what he felt was real. He had built empires, commanded men, ended wars quietly in dark rooms. Yet something about this woman's quiet presence refused to obey logic. There was no reason for her to stay in his thoughts. And yet, as she walked, unaware of the eyes that memorized her every movement, the rhythm of her steps aligned with something inside him he didn't know how to name. That night, Alina's apartment was filled with soft music and the scent of lavender candles, a life that pretended to be untouched by the world outside. But she couldn't shake the sense of being watched, not in fear, but in some strange form of awareness that made her skin tighten, her breath shallow. She sat by the window, staring at the skyline. Her reflection stared back. Same eyes, same face, but something behind them had changed. She no longer looked untouched. She looked seen. In another part of the city, Dominic sat in silence, his men dismissed, his phone untouched. He wasn't thinking of her face. He was thinking of her stillness, the way she moved like she didn't belong to chaos, the way her presence seemed to quiet everything around her. It wasn't desire yet. It was fascination, dangerous, growing, inevitable. He poured another drink, but the bourbon tasted wrong. Nothing held its flavor since that night. His empire, his routines, his power, all suddenly smaller, duller, like his world had started orbiting something it didn't understand. By midnight, Alina had fallen asleep by the window. Outside, a black car waited at the far end of the street, its headlights off, its presence unseen. The man inside didn't move. He simply watched, patient as sin. The city never sleeps, but sometimes it watches. And on that night, as the clock struck 2, a whisper passed between two lives that had no reason to cross again, yet would soon be unable to separate. Destiny doesn't knock. It follows, quietly, deliberately, until even the air begins to remember your name. And somewhere deep in the darkness, love began its slow, merciless bloom. There's a strange kind of silence that comes after obsession begins. It doesn't roar. It hums quietly, underneath your skin. For Alina, the days started blending together. The morning rush, the gallery lights, the same familiar faces, but somewhere between sunrise and dusk, the rhythm of her world began to shift. Small things. A bouquet that arrived without a name. A driver who seemed to always wait near the same corner. A stranger who opened the cafe door just as she reached it. Every time. Coincidence, she told herself. But the world had stopped believing in coincidences the moment she sat at that wrong table. Dominic watched from a distance. Not out of malice, not yet, but because watching had become inevitable. He was a man used to control, to knowing what every breath in his empire cost. But control meant nothing when curiosity became hunger. He didn't understand it. She was ordinary. No power, no name, no armor, and yet, every time he saw her, the air itself seemed to slow down, like time bowed its head for her existence. That week, he sent his people nowhere. He moved himself, unannounced, unseen, a figure in tailored black, stepping into the quiet edges of her world. At the gallery, she arranged paintings, unaware that in one of the mirrored frames behind her, a pair of dark eyes lingered. Not predatory, not yet, but searching, the way a man searches for a reflection he's lost. When she turned, he was gone. Just a shift of air, a shadow too still to be imagination. And yet, that night, when she closed her eyes, his silence followed her like perfume. Narrator, softer, almost whispering. She dreamed of hands that never touched her, of voices that never spoke, of danger that never hurt, only lingered. And when morning came, she woke with her pulse racing. Without knowing why, Dominic's world began to bend around her. Meetings delayed, deals postponed. His empire waited while he watched. The men around him didn't question. They knew what silence meant in his world. He wasn't falling. Not yet. But he was circling. the way predators do when they forget which side of the hunt they're on. Alina noticed the pattern too. Every corner she turned felt familiar. Every stranger's glance lasted a second too long. She wasn't afraid. Not exactly. It was something else, a magnetic unease, the kind that makes you want to look over your shoulder, even when you already know what you'll find. That night, it rained lightly. Not cinematic rain, just drizzle, enough to blur lights and slow the city down. Her reflection in the window shimmered, one moment hers, the next almost his. She pressed a hand to the glass. It was cold, but somewhere deep in that coldness, a warmth stirred, uninvited, unexplained. Dominic sat in his car across the street. He didn't blink, didn't move, just watched her silhouette against the city lights, the distance between them thinner than a heartbeat. He told himself this was protection, a precaution. But his pulse told another story. That invisible thread between them had tightened. And neither of them knew who was pulling harder. Some connections aren't made by choice. They're written quietly, in the spaces between fear and fascination. And that night, as the city breathed between them, the line between hunter and haunted began to disappear. By the third week, Alina's life began to pretend it was normal again. She laughed at small things, painted at the gallery, smiled when customers asked questions she didn't really hear. But under that calm, a quiet pulse kept beating, the memory of a stranger's gaze that never really left. Fate doesn't always knock loudly. Sometimes, it walks in wearing a suit and a watch that doesn't tick. That's how he returned. It was a Friday afternoon, sunlight spilling through glass, painting gold on marble floors. The gallery was half empty, the world too distracted to notice when power entered the room disguised as silence. Dominic Moretti stepped inside. He didn't belong there. The art was too soft, too fragile for a man like him. But he moved through it anyway. Each step deliberate, precise, like he was walking through a memory he wasn't sure was real. People turned to look. Some recognized him. Others simply felt something change in the air, that unspoken heaviness power always carries. Alina stood near the far wall, rearranging frames. She didn't see him at first. She only felt a shift, a ripple, like gravity itself had leaned closer. Then she turned, and her world went still. It wasn't fear that caught her breath. It was recognition without reason, like the soul remembering something the mind couldn't. For a moment, the noise around them fell away, replaced by that same quiet that had followed her for weeks. He stopped a few feet away. Their eyes met. And just like that, everything she had tried to forget, the tension, the pull, the sense of being seen too deeply, returned in a single heartbeat. Dominic studied her quietly. There was no flicker of surprise, no smile, just stillness, the kind that holds storms inside. He said nothing. Didn't need to. The weight of his gaze was its own language. She looked down, pretending to adjust a frame, but her hands betrayed her, trembling, faintly, the way truth trembles before it's spoken. He noticed. Of course he did. In his world, weakness was a scent, and she carried it like perfume. Still, he said nothing. He moved past her, closer to a painting, a piece she had made months ago. It showed a single chair in an empty room, half in shadow, half in light. He stood there for a long time. Then, softly, he asked the gallery curator who the artist was. When the name reached him, something flickered in his expression. Alina, the woman from the wrong table, the one who'd looked at him like the world still had mercy left in it. The realization settled like smoke in his chest. And with it, something darker, the awareness that fate had drawn a circle around them both, and now they were standing inside it again. He left soon after, quiet, unreadable, his footsteps fading like an unfinished thought. But the air didn't clear when he was gone. It lingered, heavy, charged, alive. That night, Alina couldn't sleep. The echo of that moment followed her. The silence between them louder than any words could have been. She tried to tell herself it was coincidence, that he was just another visitor. But lies sound hollow when you've already heard the truth once before. She stood by her window, city lights flickering like restless hearts below. And for the first time she admitted it to herself. She had wanted him to look at her. Even if it burned, even if it broke her. Across town, Dominic poured a drink and watched the same skyline. The ice melted untouched. He didn't drink anymore when he was thinking, and tonight his mind wouldn't stop. The girl from the restaurant was still in his orbit, not by chance, not by mistake. He didn't believe in those. He told himself he'd let it go. that she was nothing, just a memory, a moment. But every time he closed his eyes, her face returned, soft but unyielding. The way she'd looked at him without fear, it had no place in his world, and yet it had found one. 2 people. 2 cities within a city, both sleepless, both haunted by something they didn't understand. And somewhere between them, the invisible thread pulled tighter, turning curiosity into gravity, and gravity into something that neither of them could escape. That night, the city was silent, but somewhere in that silence, destiny took one more step forward, and before either of them knew it, the second collision had already begun. The next morning arrived like a lie, bright, polished, pretending to be innocent. Alina walked through the gallery as if light could wash away the shadow of what she'd felt yesterday. But memory doesn't obey daylight. It lingers in corners, in echoes, in the soft brush of something you can't name. Every sound seemed sharper, the scrape of frames, the murmur of footsteps, the faint hum of air conditioning. All too alive, too heavy. And behind it all, a rhythm her body still remembered. The quiet intensity of being watched. That evening, when she closed the gallery, she caught her reflection in the glass door, a woman standing where a girl used to be. There was something different in her eyes now. Not fear, not curiosity, something between them. A dangerous curiosity that felt too much like surrender. Across the city, Dominic Moretti sat in the back of his car, the skyline bleeding gold into dusk. His driver waited for orders that never came. The boss was thinking. He had gone over the details of his schedule a dozen times. Meetings, shipments, debts owed. But her name kept cutting through it all like static. Alina, the one mistake he hadn't made but couldn't forget. The softness he hadn't earned but somehow carried. He leaned back, eyes closed, and tried to erase her the way he erased everything that made him weak. But she wasn't like the others. Her silence had a voice. Her presence had stayed. When he finally opened his eyes, he realized where the car had stopped. The gallery. He hadn't even noticed giving the order. He stepped out, just for a moment, telling himself he only wanted to see if she was there, nothing more. But through the glass, he saw the lights turning off, the slow motion of her hands locking the doors, her hair catching the last bit of sunlight. He should have walked away. He didn't. That night, Alina took the subway home. The city was quieter now, the kind of quiet that hums with unseen eyes. She felt it, that same weight, that same invisible pull, the way you feel someone watching before you know where they stand. When she reached her apartment, she turned on one lamp and stood there, staring at her reflection again. Something inside her whispered that her life had already changed. Not in explosions, but in quiet implosions. A shift she couldn't see but could feel, deep and steady like gravity beneath her ribs. She walked to her easel. There was a half-finished painting, a man's silhouette standing in a city of smoke. She hadn't touched it for weeks. Tonight her hand moved on its own. She added light to the edges of the shadow, not to redeem it, but to understand it. Hours passed. The paint dried, and for the first time, she saw what she'd been trying not to admit. It wasn't a stranger she was painting. It was him. In another part of the city, Dominic stared out the window of his penthouse. Rain had begun to fall, soft and cold. He thought of her again. Not her face, but her stillness. The way she stood in that gallery, framed by silence. He wondered what kind of story could hide behind such eyes. He told himself it didn't matter. But men like him never wonder about things that don't. His phone buzzed. A report from one of his men. Background checks. Surveillance logs. Nothing out of the ordinary. And yet, when he read her name, something inside him shifted again. A waitress once, now an artist. Clean record. No family listed. No one who'd come looking if she vanished. The knowledge should have calmed him. It didn't, because instead of danger, he felt something worse. Fascination. He poured himself a drink but didn't touch it. Instead, he stood there, thinking of the line between curiosity and obsession, and how easily a man crosses it when the world stops making sense without one person in it. Alina slept uneasily that night. Dreams flickered, fragments of light, the echo of footsteps, a hand that almost touched hers before fading away. When she woke, dawn had crept into her room like a secret. On the table, beside her painting, lay a white envelope. No name, no seal, no sound of arrival. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single card. An invitation, gold letters, black ink. A private exhibition. Exclusive, anonymous, hosted by Moretti Industries. For a long time, she just stared at it. Then, against every reason, every warning in her bones, she whispered to herself, Maybe some stories find you whether you want them to or not. The city moved on. But two lives had already begun to orbit closer, each heartbeat, each glance, each breath narrowing the distance between fate and choice. And somewhere, under the hum of New York's night, destiny smiled, because it knew exactly what it was doing. The city glowed that evening like it had been painted in gold and sin. New York knew how to wear luxury, diamonds glittering on wet pavement, whispers stitched into silk. And beneath all that beauty, something darker pulsed, a promise, a trap, a heartbeat waiting to be heard. Alina stood before her mirror, the invitation resting beside her perfume bottle. For hours she had told herself she wouldn't go, but now, as the clock neared 9, her reflection had already decided. The kind of decision that doesn't ask for permission. It just happens, like rain before thunder. She dressed in black. Not mourning, not seduction, something in between. The kind of black that belonged to both worlds, the living and the lost. Her hair fell loose, her lips brushed with a shade that wasn't quite red, but close enough to danger. She didn't know who she was dressing for. But her pulse did. Outside, the night air felt alive, electric, heavy with stormlight and perfume. A private car waited by the curb, its windows tinted like secrets. No name, no driver's eyes, just a silent door opening, as if the night itself was inviting her in. She entered. The city rolled by in streaks of neon and shadow, a blur that looked almost like memory. Somewhere between streets and seconds, she wondered. Was this curiosity, or fate leading her by the wrist? The car stopped before a mansion on the edge of the city. It didn't look like art lived there. It looked like power did. Columns, marble steps, and guards who stood too still to be decoration. Inside, music floated like smoke, soft jazz layered with something colder beneath it. The exhibition had no signs, no artists' names, just canvases lit by single lamps, shadows caressing every edge. Guests moved in slow circles, the kind of people who smiled with their mouths but not their eyes. Every detail whispered wealth, but every silence screamed control, and then she felt it. That same pull, that quiet gravity that had followed her since the night she sat at the wrong table. She didn't need to see him to know he was there. Her steps slowed. Every painting she passed seemed to breathe. Images of love and violence. Faces half hidden. Moments that looked like devotion but burned like sin. Whoever curated this knew how to turn emotion into weaponry. At the end of the hall, under a pool of golden light, hung a single painting. She stopped. Her breath caught. It was hers. Her unfinished work, the silhouette of a man standing in smoke. Except now it was finished. Someone had completed the edges, deepened the shadows, added color where she hadn't dared. The result was haunting. Beautiful. Unmistakably his. She didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stood there. Her heart folding into the realization that she wasn't the only one who'd been looking back. Behind her, silence shifted. Presence, power. The air changed temperature, as though someone had stepped too close to her thoughts. Her spine straightened. Every instinct whispered his name before her lips ever could. Dominic. He didn't need to appear for her to feel him. His presence was a signature, heavy, restrained, and deliberate. Somewhere in the crowd, eyes watched her, patient, unblinking. The kind of gaze that doesn't touch skin, it touches soul. She turned slowly, scanning the reflections in glass and shadow. But he stayed unseen, like a ghost that wanted to be felt, not found. Time stretched thin. Music bled softer, guests faded to background noise, and all she could feel was the echo of something inevitable, the slow, magnetic draw of two worlds circling the same fire. When she left the gallery, she didn't notice the camera near the doorway, the lens quietly following her every move. She didn't see the black car waiting again, headlights low, idling like a heartbeat in the dark. As she walked into the night, her heels clicked softly, a rhythm almost in sync with the one she couldn't escape. Inside the car, a man's silhouette watched her from the distance. A small smile ghosted across his lips. Not victory, recognition. Because for the first time, he understood what kind of danger she truly was. Not the kind that threatened his empire, the kind that threatened his control. The city swallowed her again. But their connection, unseen, unspoken, tightened like a string between two hearts that had never agreed to meet, and somewhere deep inside both of them, a single truth began to bloom. It was no longer a mistake. It was destiny. And destiny always demands its price. The days that followed were not quiet. They only pretended to be. The world went on, the city moved, lights flickered, people smiled, but somewhere between those details, something new began to stir. An invisible thread had been pulled too tight to ignore. Alina tried to bury the night of the exhibition in routine, work, paint, silence, but every brushstroke betrayed her. Every color she mixed turned into the shade of his memory, the warmth of his eyes, the chill of his voice, and when she closed her eyes at night, her mind no longer obeyed her. It built him, out of smoke, out of sound, out of unfinished thoughts. His presence pressed against her imagination like a fingerprint she couldn't wash away. Dominic wasn't any better. He told himself he didn't care. He told himself it was just curiosity, nothing more than a puzzle to be solved. But even in the middle of his meetings, his attention drifted to the memory of a woman who shouldn't have mattered. Her voice, her restraint, her defiance. They all unsettled the part of him that lived by order and control. He was used to fear, used to power, used to women who bent before he had to ask. But she didn't bend, she haunted, and that was far more dangerous. At night, he reviewed her file again. Name, background, the trivial details that made up a life. Everything checked out, everything looked ordinary. But something in those pages lied. He closed the folder, leaned back, exhaled slowly. There was a quiet war happening inside him, between the man who ruled an empire and the man who suddenly wanted to understand a stranger's silence. Alina's studio became her refuge, the smell of turpentine and rain through the window. The floor scattered with unfinished canvases. Each painting held a different emotion, guilt, desire, fear, longing. But together, they looked like one story told 20 times in different tongues. And sometimes, when she worked past midnight, she felt it again, that invisible gaze. Like he was somewhere near, just out of sight. Not watching her body, but her truth, the parts she didn't even show herself. One evening, while cleaning her brushes, she noticed something. A small black envelope slipped beneath her studio door. No name, no address, just a wax seal. The same crest she had seen carved into the marble at that mansion. Her heartbeat stumbled. She opened it slowly. Inside, a single note. 4 words, simple, unthreatening, but enough to set the room spinning. You left something unfinished. No signature, no instruction. Just a message that sounded less like an invitation and more like a command. She didn't sleep that night. Didn't eat. Didn't think clearly. By morning, she had already chosen her dress, the same black that had once made her feel invisible. Now it made her feel seen. When the car arrived, she didn't question it. She just stepped in. The same tinted windows, the same silence, the same magnetic pull that whispered she was crossing a line she could never uncross. Inside the mansion, time seemed different. The air thicker, the walls too quiet. And somewhere deeper in those halls, she felt him waiting. She followed the corridor of dim lights, each step echoing louder than the last, until she reached a room she had never seen before. It wasn't the study, not the gallery. This was private, shadowed, the kind of place that didn't exist on any blueprint. She stepped inside. A single lamp burned in the corner, casting a slow golden glow across polished wood and dark velvet. And on the table, the painting from the exhibition. Her painting, the one he had finished. She stood there for a long moment. Her pulse was loud, too loud. The scent of smoke and something faintly familiar filled the air. No voices, no footsteps, just the feeling, heavy, magnetic, that he was near. Every instinct told her to leave. But her heart refused, because some meetings are not planned. They are summoned by something older than logic, something more dangerous than choice. And in that quiet, she finally understood what this really was. Not an accident, not a chase, not even a love story yet. It was the beginning of surrender. And the most dangerous thing about surrender is that it never feels like falling until you hit the ground. The moment she stepped closer to that table, the air changed, not like a breeze, not even like breath, but like memory itself waking up, that painting, the one she had sworn never to see again. Now it stood before her, whole, complete, as if someone had reached inside her heart and finished the confession she'd been too afraid to paint. Her fingertips hovered over the surface. The strokes were familiar, yet not her own. It was like another version of her, the one she buried, had finished it in secret. She exhaled slowly. The sound trembled. The silence around her. Listened. Behind her, faintly. Footsteps. But she didn't turn. She didn't need to. Every heartbeat she'd tried to forget recognized the rhythm of his presence. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The room already belonged to him. The air itself shaped by his stillness. She felt that quiet gravity, pulling her towards something unnamed. Not safety, not fear. Something in between. The dangerous middle where all truths live. Her mind screamed to step back. Her body stayed. She could feel his gaze on her skin, not touching, but unraveling. The kind of attention that stripped away pretense, layer by layer, until only truth remained. Her throat ached with words she would never say. Her pulse echoed like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. He moved closer, slow, deliberate, like a storm learning patience. And though she couldn't see him, his presence filled the distance between them until distance itself forgot to exist. In another life, this would have been simple. A man, a woman, a look, but in this one, there were ghosts between them. Secrets with blood on them, and a past that refused to stay buried. Still, something in her chest whispered, "Don't run," because running wouldn't save her now. Not from herself. The painting before her seemed to breathe, the colors darker now, as if absorbing every flicker of what she felt. Somewhere between fear and fascination, she realized something cruel. He hadn't just finished her art. He had understood it. The shadows, the silence, the ache, as if he'd seen her before she ever stood in front of him. And that realization was far more intimate than any touch could be. He stopped just behind her, close enough for silence to pulse between them. The kind of closeness that made every breath sound louder, every heartbeat sharper. She wanted to hate him for it, for the control, the danger, the quiet claim he carried without words. But what terrified her more was that a part of her didn't want to. Somewhere deep inside, the line between fear and desire began to blur, and once that line is crossed, nothing ever goes back. Outside, thunder murmured across the distance. Inside, another kind of storm began. She didn't look at him, but her reflection caught his outline in the glass. A figure half in light, half in shadow. And in that reflection, she saw it. Not the monster the world whispered about, but the man who'd been drowning long before she arrived. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of what she might do because of him. The painting shimmered faintly under the lamplight. Two figures tangled between light and dark. And as she stared at it, a single truth bloomed in her chest. This was not the end of something. It was the beginning of a fall neither of them would survive unchanged. They were no longer strangers. They were two storms circling the same ruin, bound by a gravity they didn't understand, and a hunger neither dared to name. The night didn't end there. It simply waited. Because every story like this one, every dangerous kind of love, starts not with a kiss, but with a silence that refuses to break. The air in the gallery lingered long after he left. It was the kind of silence that didn't fade, it watched. Every light, every shadow seemed to remember his presence. She stood there, motionless, as if moving would make the moment disappear. Her pulse was still uneven, that strange rhythm she could never name when he was near. The painting before her had changed again. Or maybe she was seeing it differently now. It wasn't just a reflection of pain anymore. It was him and her, and everything neither of them would ever say out loud. The world outside moved like nothing had happened. Cars, people, rain-soaked streets. But inside her something had shifted, something irreversible. She had seen power before. She had served it, survived it, hidden from it. But what lived behind his eyes, that wasn't just control. It was recognition. He had looked at her once, long ago, and never truly stopped. All night she tried to erase it from her mind. She failed. Every breath she took carried the echo of that stillness between them. Every corner of the room felt like a memory she didn't remember making. By morning, she had convinced herself it was just fear, a chemical trick of adrenaline, danger wrapped in attraction. But then, the message came. No name, no sender. Just a single line, "You left before the storm ended." Her hands trembled as she read it. Not because of the words, but because of what they didn't say. She felt watched again, not in a way that frightened her, but in a way that made her heartbeat betray her. That night, she walked to the balcony of her small apartment. The city glittered beneath her, beautiful, distant, untouchable. But she felt none of it, only that invisible thread, stretching somewhere in the dark, pulling her toward a truth she'd promised herself to forget. Somewhere below, a black car passed slowly through the streetlight. Its windows tinted, its engine quiet. She couldn't see who sat inside. But she didn't need to. She knew. A whisper of fear brushed her neck. Not the kind that warns you to run, the kind that reminds you you're already caught. She went inside, shut the curtains, but the darkness felt closer now, like it had followed her home, like it knew her name. She lay awake for hours, thinking of the man who could destroy her with a word. And yet, when he looked at her, seemed just as haunted as she was. That paradox, that impossible mix of danger and gentleness, was the beginning of her undoing. Some people fall in love like light. Fast, brilliant, obvious. She fell like a secret, slowly, painfully, until it was too deep to climb out. And though she tried to fight it, every night that followed carried his ghost, in the sound of footsteps below, in the rhythm of rain against glass, in the ache that never left her chest. She didn't know that miles away, in a room full of smoke and silence, he sat at his desk, the same message she'd read glowing on his phone. He hadn't expected her to reply. He only wanted to know if she'd read it, and when he saw the little scene mark appear, he smiled, because now he knew. She remembered. She felt it too. The story between them, the one neither of them ever meant to start, had just been reignited, and in his world, love wasn't a rescue. It was a promise wrapped in danger, and every promise had a price. Narrator, lower tone, cinematic whisper. She thought she'd escaped him. But the truth was simple. You can't outrun a storm that remembers your name. The day began quietly, too quietly. The kind of silence that comes before something irreversible. She had painted all morning, strokes heavy, colors darker than usual. Every shade she touched seemed to carry his name. No matter what she created, the canvas always found its way back to him. By noon, the gallery felt airless. Even the light through the tall windows seemed cautious, as if it feared disturbing what lingered in her thoughts. Then came the sound, a knock, not hesitant, measured, certain. She turned, brush still in her hand, heart caught between curiosity and dread. Outside the door, a man in a dark suit stood, expression unreadable. He left something on the counter. A white envelope. No words, no explanation. And then, he was gone. The paper glowed under the afternoon sun, edges gilded, seal black and cold. She recognized the emblem instantly, the same symbol engraved on a gun she'd once seen too close. Her fingers hovered above it, that familiar pull between fear and gravity. She opened it slowly, and the faint scent of smoke and rain escaped like memory returning home. Inside, a card, elegant, minimal, an invitation. It was for an art exhibition. Private, exclusive, hosted by one of the city's most powerful names. His name. She froze. Her breath trembled. He hadn't reached out directly. He didn't need to. The invitation itself was a message, a command wrapped in courtesy. It read like a simple gesture, but she knew better. Every letter was deliberate, every word chosen to test her, to see if she'd come back, willingly. She closed her eyes. The silence grew heavier. Old instincts screamed at her to stay away. But curiosity, that dangerous, beautifully human flaw, whispered louder. What if he wasn't the same man anymore? What if the storm had changed him too? That night, the city dressed itself in glass and gold. Limousines purred down rain-slicked streets. Behind every door, laughter hid secrets. And somewhere in that glittering chaos, he waited. She stood before her mirror, the dress simple but deliberate. Not armor, not surrender. Something in between. As she looked at herself, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Stronger, calmer, but still trembling where the heart refused to forget. When she stepped outside, the wind carried the scent of wet asphalt and memory. It smelled like their past, like danger dressed as desire. Each step toward the car felt like walking back into a dream she had promised never to see again. At the venue, time slowed, cameras flashed, music flowed like silk, and inside that golden hall, power stood disguised as art. She moved through the crowd quietly, each face unfamiliar, each smile too polished. But then, a shift, that feeling, that impossible pull. She didn't need to see him. She felt him. The air thickened, the kind of gravity that only exists between two people who once stood too close to destruction. Somewhere across the room, eyes found her. And she knew. He had been watching long before she arrived, She turned slightly, not enough to meet his gaze, but enough to let him know she felt it. A silent acknowledgement, a dangerous truce. Night went on, music and champagne blurring around her, but her focus stayed fixed. Not on the art, not on the guests, but on the invisible thread that tethered her heart to the man she had left behind. By the time she left the gallery, the city had fallen quiet again. Only her reflection stared back from the dark glass doors. And behind it, a shadow moved. He hadn't approached her. Not yet. But that was the point. He didn't need to touch her to remind her who he was. His silence was enough. It said everything. She thought she was walking away from temptation. But in his world, every invitation came with a consequence. And tonight, she'd already accepted it. Days passed. But silence never truly leaves when it belongs to someone like him. It lingers, like perfume after a stranger walks by. Like a bruise that fades, but never heals. She tried to drown it in work, in paint, in the comfort of normal days. But the moment quiet settled, his presence returned. In fragments, in whispers the mind couldn't unhear. The first gift arrived on a Tuesday morning. No name, no card, just a small, square box, wrapped in black ribbon. The kind of simplicity that felt deliberate, calculated. Inside, a silver key, old, worn. The kind that didn't belong to any modern lock. But she recognized it. It was the key to a door in the old gallery she used to paint in. The one where he'd once stood behind her, watching in silence, saying nothing, but changing everything. Her breath caught. The air grew colder. The message was clear. He hadn't forgotten. Not a single detail. That night, she couldn't sleep. The moonlight slipped across her room, tracing ghost shadows along the walls. Every corner felt haunted, not by fear, but by memory, by him. A part of her wanted to throw the key away. Another part, the quieter, more dangerous one, kept it on her nightstand, close enough to touch, close enough to remember. The second gift came 3 days later, a painting. No signature, no explanation, just her face. Not as she looked now, but as she had been then. That night in the old studio, eyes half lit, hands covered in color, the air around her trembling with the nearness of something unsaid. She stood there staring at it, every heartbeat echoing too loudly. It wasn't just art. It was a memory, trapped in pigment. A moment only he could have seen. The brushstrokes were familiar, precise, but passionate, controlled chaos. Like him, she felt it. That slow, unbearable pull between anger and longing. He was reaching for her again, but not through touch. Through remembrance. Through the kind of intimacy that required no words. The next gift didn't come in a box. It came through the air. At dusk, when she returned home from the gallery, a melody played from the old record player she never used. It was already spinning. A song she hadn't heard in years. The same one that once filled his penthouse on a night she'd tried to forget. Her pulse stumbled. How had it started? Who had been here? She turned slowly, but no one was there. Just that haunting music, and the feeling that the walls themselves were watching. That's when she noticed it. A small note, left on the table beside the record. 4 words, written in his hand. I never stopped watching. Her chest tightened. The words burned through her like smoke. She wanted to be furious, to feel violated, but instead, what she felt was worse. Recognition. He knew her well enough to play her fear like an instrument, and she hated that some part of her still responded to the melody. In the days that followed, she told herself it would stop, that he was only testing her resolve. But the pattern continued. Quiet, patient, precise. A single black rose left on her doorstep. A message carved into the frost on her window, still beautiful in the dark. Each gesture, soft, subtle, untraceable, but every one of them pulled her closer to the edge she swore she'd never cross again. By the 7th day, sleep had become impossible. Her thoughts spun in circles, between fear and fascination, anger and ache, because deep down she knew this wasn't obsession. It was possession disguised as longing, a claim she had once allowed and never truly escaped. Narrator. Voice soft, low, breaking slightly. He wasn't chasing her. He was reminding her that in his world, love didn't fade. It waited. It watched. And it always, always found its way back. She stood by the window, city lights flickering like dying stars, and in the reflection of the glass, she thought she saw him. Just for a moment, tall, still, watching, but when she turned, there was nothing, only the night, and the feeling that somewhere out there, someone was smiling in the dark. By the time the invitation arrived, she'd already made her decision. No running, no hiding. If he wanted to play games, she'd enter the board herself. The card was black. Edges embossed in gold, no name written, just the emblem she knew too well. The insignia of the Luciani Foundation, his foundation, a charity gala. Public, elegant, dangerous. Her hands trembled as she traced the seal. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. That night, the city shimmered with its usual deceit. Lights bright enough to disguise the darkness beneath. She wore a gown the color of midnight, its fabric flowing like quiet revenge. No jewels, no perfume, just the sharp scent of purpose. She told herself it wasn't about him, it was about closure, truth, freedom, but deep inside, something else stirred, a pulse too wild to belong to anger alone. The ballroom glowed like a cathedral of sin, crystals dripped from the ceiling, casting fractured halos across faces painted in wealth and power. Every smile here was a mask, every glance a weapon. And then, she felt it, that familiar gravity, that pull that once drowned her completely. He was here. She didn't have to see him to know. The air shifted. The world leaned toward him, like even silence remembered his name. She moved carefully through the crowd, each step echoing against marble floors. Behind her calm, her heart raced like thunder wrapped in velvet. And then, there he was, standing near the grand staircase. Black suit, black tie, eyes like winter before snow. He was surrounded by power, men who owed him fortunes, women who owed him secrets, yet somehow, his gaze found her instantly. Like he'd been waiting for this exact second. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. Just one look. And every memory she'd buried clawed back to life. She held her ground. Didn't look away. Didn't flinch. Narrator. Whisper soft, almost reverent. In that moment, the ballroom disappeared. The crowd became smoke, and time simply stopped breathing. She approached the champagne bar. He didn't move, not yet. He was giving her space to hang herself in calmness. He was good at that. Always had been. She could feel eyes following her. His guards, his allies, his ghosts. Every inch of that room was under his control. And still, she stayed, because sometimes defiance was the only language love understood. A man beside her spoke, laughter, meaningless. She nodded absently, but her gaze stayed fixed in the mirror behind the bar, where his reflection stood still, watching her through glass and distance. The tension between them stretched. Thin, invisible, unbreakable. One move, one breath, and the entire illusion would shatter. Then, he turned. Walked toward her, slow, certain. Predator and memory intertwined. Every sound dulled. Every light dimmed. It wasn't attraction. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. Of something neither of them ever escaped. He stopped 2 steps behind her. Didn't speak. Didn't need to. The air around them changed temperature. Colder near her skin. Warmer near her pulse. She closed her eyes, steadying her breath. The scent of his cologne drifted. Faint, dark, familiar. It felt like standing in the doorway of a past that still breathed. And then, he walked away. No words, no touch. Just absence. Deliberate, heavy, commanding. But when she looked down, there it was. A folded note on the bar. Unfolded quietly. 3 words. You came back. Her throat tightened. The paper trembled in her hand. She wanted to believe it was accusation. But she knew better. It was truth. A truth she hated, and still obeyed. Because she had come back. Not for answers, not for closure, but for him. Sometimes love doesn't wait for forgiveness. It simply returns, uninvited, unchanged, unstoppable. And as she stood there under the golden chandeliers, with the city burning quietly outside, she finally understood. This wasn't reunion. It was reincarnation, a cycle too ancient to break, too sacred to name. He called the next morning. No hesitation, no message through his assistant. Just his voice, calm, deep, measured. The kind of voice that could still reach the part of her that wanted to forget him. He didn't ask where she was. He already knew. He always did. The message was short. He wanted to meet. Private place. No audience. No pretense. The address was too familiar. The old art studio. The one he'd built years ago, when his mother was still alive. A quiet place behind his estate, far from the noise. Where paintbrushes once met silence instead of blood. She almost didn't go. Almost. But curiosity has a way of sounding like courage when your heart's already broken. By the time she arrived, the sun was already sinking. Shadows stretched across the tall windows, and the scent of turpentine and old canvas filled the room. Nothing had changed. The same easels, the same half-finished painting on the far wall. The same echo that made her chest tighten. He was there, standing near the window, hands in his pockets, looking out like the horizon had something to confess. She didn't speak, didn't move, just listened to the sound of the wind pushing through the broken frame. He turned slowly. No smile, no surprise, just eyes, dark, steady, and unreadable. "Thank you for coming," he said, that was all. But the way he said it, it wasn't gratitude. It was control. She nodded, stepping closer. Every movement felt deliberate, like walking through memories she'd never buried properly. The floor creaked under her shoes. It was the same spot where, once upon a time, he'd watched her paint for hours without saying a word. Back when silence between them had felt like comfort, not tension. Now, it just hurt. He motioned to the old stool near the center of the room. She sat down. He didn't. He stayed standing, studying her. Not like a lover, not even like an enemy, but like someone searching for the last missing piece of a puzzle. "You shouldn't have come back," he finally said. It wasn't a threat. It sounded like regret, but she didn't answer. There was nothing left to defend. He walked closer, his shoes scraping lightly against the wooden floor. Every step was slow, controlled, measured, like he was afraid of what would happen if he got too close too fast. When he stopped, she could feel his breath, not on her skin, but somewhere deeper, a pressure that never really left her even after all this time. He glanced at the old painting, a half-finished portrait of a woman with sad eyes. His mother. He'd never finished it. "I kept this place locked for years," he said quietly. Couldn't walk in without remembering how everything used to feel. Before. His voice cracked slightly. Not enough for most to notice, but she did. She always did. He turned back toward her. "I thought I forgot you," he said. "But every time I came close, something stopped me. Maybe guilt, maybe love, maybe both." She looked away. The truth between them was heavy. Too heavy to hold. Too dangerous to drop. She rose from the stool, wanting to say something. Anything that would end the ache sitting between them. But he took one step forward, and that was enough to make her stop breathing. No touch. No words, just proximity. That unbearable space where love and ruin meet. He whispered her name, softly, like it was both a question and an apology. And she realized the danger wasn't outside these walls anymore. It was right here, standing inches away, wearing the same face that once taught her how to feel safe and how to shatter. She turned to leave. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't look back. But as she reached the door, his voice followed. Low, final, almost broken. "Next time, don't walk away. We've both done enough of that." Narrator. Calm, reflective tone. Some meetings don't begin again. They simply continue, exactly where the heartbreak left off. And as the studio door closed behind her, she knew. This wasn't over. It never would be. Days began to stretch like shadows after that meeting. The kind that never end, only fade into softer shades of ache. She told herself it was over. That what happened in that studio was just memory brushing against old skin. But memory has its own will. It lingers in places you don't clean often enough, the back of your mind, the edge of your heartbeat. She went back to her small apartment downtown. The one that used to feel like safety. Now it just felt quiet, too quiet. The world outside kept moving. Traffic lights changing, people rushing, laughter spilling from bars below her window. But inside, time slowed down. Every cup of coffee went cold before she could finish it. Every painting she tried to start turned into another unfinished thought. She started noticing things again. Little things. A car parked across the street too many nights in a row. A shadow that left only when she turned on the light. Phone calls that disconnected the moment she said hello. She wasn't paranoid. Not anymore. She knew what protection looked like when it came from him. Quiet, invisible, relentless. At first, she tried to ignore it. Let him have his distance. Let her have her peace. But peace built on someone else's watchful eyes isn't peace at all. One night, she walked home late from the gallery. It was drizzling, soft and cold. She didn't bother with an umbrella. Maybe part of her wanted to feel something real again, even if it was only rain. When she reached her door, she found a note slipped beneath it. No name, no message. Just a single pressed flower. White, fragile, familiar. The same kind that used to grow behind the old studio. She didn't need to ask who sent it. She only wondered why. The following morning, she woke early. She made coffee, sat by the window, and tried to paint again. But her hands wouldn't move the way they used to. It wasn't fear. It was hesitation. That quiet question that keeps echoing. What if you never really left? She thought about calling him. Then didn't, because calling would mean admitting she still cared. And she'd promised herself not to cross that line again. Instead, she poured the coffee down the sink and left for work. At the gallery, everything was normal. The same faces, the same soft music, the same clients pretending to understand pain through art. But she wasn't pretending anymore. She was living it. A new painting hung near the back wall, one she hadn't finished before he left her years ago. A storm of grays and red streaks, half chaos, half confession. People walked past it without looking twice, but she stood there longer than she should have. Seeing the pattern she hadn't noticed before. 2 figures, hidden in the brush strokes, reaching but never touching. That night, when the gallery lights dimmed and the crowd thinned out, she locked the door and sat on the floor. For the first time in weeks, she let herself breathe without control. There was no grand decision, no dramatic clarity, just a quiet acceptance that sometimes love doesn't end when you stop speaking. It just changes shape, becomes distance, becomes memory guarding you from the outside world. She didn't know if he was still watching, didn't know if he ever stopped. All she knew was that she no longer felt alone when she looked out the window at night. And maybe that was the point, because some people don't come back to stay. They come back to make sure you're still breathing. Weeks passed like that. The flower from the note had dried on her desk. The paint on her canvas finally set. And though her life moved quietly forward, there was always that small, unspoken presence somewhere between protection and penance. Narrator. Slow, reflective tone. Love doesn't always ask for forgiveness. Sometimes it just stands in the distance, waiting for the moment it can let you go without breaking again. And somewhere in that silence, she learned that letting go wasn't forgetting. It was learning to live with the shadow that still chose to stand guard. She didn't know when it started, that quiet shift between service and something deeper. At first it was routine. Morning trays, folded linens, polite silence. But lately, there was a gravity to every small moment, a stillness that pulled her toward him even when she tried not to look. She felt it most when he wasn't speaking. Those moments when his presence filled the room and words felt unnecessary. Like the air itself was listening. The mansion had grown quieter since the charity event. The staff whispered less. The child laughed more, and the man who once kept the world outside his walls had started leaving the door open a little longer. He didn't talk about business anymore, not around her. His voice softened, not enough for comfort, just enough for confusion. Sometimes she caught him watching her reflection in the window instead of his own, and every time she turned, he'd already looked away. It should have felt safe. It didn't. It felt like walking barefoot through glass, delicate, dangerous, impossible to stop. She remembered the night he found her in the library. She'd been dusting shelves long after midnight, pretending not to notice his footsteps. He stood there for a moment, saying nothing, just watching. Then quietly, he asked if she ever read the books she cleaned. Her heart almost slipped out of her chest. No one ever asked her that. Not here. Not in this world, she nodded. And he smiled, faint, almost hidden. Good, he'd said. Books don't lie as easily as people do, that was all. But the line stayed with her for days. Every time she looked at him afterward, she thought of that sentence, and the unspoken question behind it. Was he warning her? Or himself? Because lately she'd seen it, the change in his eyes. He was trying to remember something. Trying not to feel something, trying and failing, and she was trying not to want what she shouldn't. A life, a name, a reason to stay longer than she was allowed to. One evening, the child had fallen asleep early. The house felt emptier than usual. She was walking down the corridor when she saw him, alone, standing near the piano, his head bowed, a glass in his hand, untouched. He didn't notice her at first. Then his voice broke the silence, low and rough. "Do you ever think about running away?" She froze, unsure if the question was meant for her. When he turned, his expression made it clear. He already knew the answer. She could have lied. She didn't. Instead, she said the only thing that felt true. I already did. I just haven't gotten far. Something in him cracked. Not visibly, but enough for her to feel it. He stepped closer, slowly, like testing gravity. And for a heartbeat, it seemed the world might stop spinning, but he didn't touch her. He just looked at her, as if memorizing the shape of something he could never keep. Then he whispered, more to himself than to her. That's the problem with escape. It feels too much like home. He left before she could reply, and she stood there, heart still trembling, breath caught between past and present. Later that night, she sat by her small window, watching the lights flicker outside. Every sound in the mansion felt louder, every memory heavier. She thought about what he said, about the strange ache in his words. He wasn't talking about her. Not only her, he was talking about something lost long ago, someone, maybe, that she reminded him of. And that thought terrified her more than anything, because if he ever remembered, if he ever connected the faces, the moments, the truth she'd buried, everything would fall apart. She leaned her head against the cold glass and whispered into the dark, "Please don't remember me." But deep down, she already knew he would. He had always trusted silence more than words. But lately, even silence felt alive, breathing between walls, moving with her shadow. Every time she passed by, something inside him shifted. Not violently, not like the storms he was used to, but in small, haunting ways that refused to fade. He used to believe he understood control, power, the weight of his own name, but that illusion was slipping. Piece by piece, every time her eyes met his and then looked away, she never said much, never crossed any lines. Yet the air between them carried something raw, something that didn't belong in his world of rules and revenge. It wasn't attraction. Not only that, it was recognition, as if she had known him before he became this version of himself, before the blood, before the scars, before the silence. The mansion had grown quieter since she arrived. He didn't know if that was peace or danger. The staff walked softer now. The child laughed more often, and he, the man who never stopped moving, found himself listening for her footsteps. He tried to focus on business. Meetings, accounts, calls that came in under coded names. But behind every conversation, her voice lingered in the back of his mind. That soft tone she used when talking to the little girl. It was warmth he couldn't name, something he hadn't heard since his wife died. And yet, there was something else about her, a distance, a shadow she carried that didn't belong to any servant. Sometimes he'd catch her staring at a photograph, an old family picture he didn't remember showing her. She'd look away when she noticed him watching, pretending to be busy with her work. At night, he started seeing her in his dreams, not in the way a man dreams of a woman, but like a memory, a face blurred by time. And each morning, he woke with the same question whispering through him. Who was she really? The child adored her. She followed her like a shadow, reaching for her hand, laughing in ways that made the whole house feel human again. But even the child's laughter couldn't quiet the growing unease inside him. He began noticing small things. The way the waitress, or whatever she was now, seemed to know details no stranger should. How she flinched when someone mentioned his late wife's name. How her eyes clouded whenever she saw his wedding ring still on his finger. One evening he returned home earlier than usual. The sound of her voice floated from the garden, low, steady, and trembling with something he couldn't define. She was telling the girl a story. He stopped before stepping closer, listening from the shadows. It was a story about a woman who had lost everything, but found a reason to live again. In the smile of a child that wasn't hers. The words were soft, but each one cut him open, because there was truth in that voice. Pain, real and buried. When she noticed him standing behind them, her voice stopped instantly. The little girl looked up, smiling, but he could see the change in the woman's eyes. That flash of fear she couldn't hide fast enough. Something inside him tightened. Later, when the child was asleep, he found her cleaning in the hall. He wanted to ask her. He wanted to demand the truth. But when he opened his mouth, the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just said her name quietly, and she froze. She turned toward him, hands still trembling around the silver tray. Their eyes met. And for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. Two strangers standing in the same lie, breathing the same truth neither dared to speak. He stepped closer, slowly. Her heartbeat seemed to fill the air, not with fear, but with something heavier. Guilt, memory, love, maybe, in some broken form neither of them was ready to name. He didn't touch her. Didn't need to. The silence between them said enough. There was a story there. one he hadn't read yet, but somehow already knew the ending to. And that realization scared him more than any enemy ever had. She lowered her gaze, whispering a polite, "Good night, sir," before walking past him. But as she did, he heard it. That same lullaby she'd once hummed to the child. Only now. He remembered where he'd heard it before, years ago, sung by a voice he thought he'd lost forever. And just like that, everything inside him changed. The silence wasn't peace anymore. It was the beginning of the storm. The mansion was too quiet that night. Even the rain that usually kissed the glass seemed to hold its breath. He sat alone in his office, staring at the last drop of whiskey in his glass, amber light flickering through it like a fading flame. But it wasn't the whiskey keeping him awake. It was her voice. That lullaby. That memory he couldn't unhear. He had searched his mind for hours, trying to remember where it came from. And then, like a ghost returning home, it hit him. His late wife used to sing that same melody every night, when their daughter was still small enough to fall asleep in her arms. But this waitress, this woman, how could she know it? He leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling, trying to breathe through the storm building inside him. The logical part of his mind said it was a coincidence, a tune carried through generations perhaps. But his instincts, the same instincts that had kept him alive through betrayal and blood, told him otherwise. There were no coincidences in his world, only secrets. Down the hall, her room light still glowed faintly. He'd noticed it often, how she never slept early, how she'd sit by the window long after the house had gone still. He rose slowly, footsteps soft against the marble, and made his way toward that faint glow. Inside, she sat with her back to the door, fingers clutching a small photograph. The sound of his presence made her shoulders stiffen, but she didn't turn. She didn't have to. She knew who it was. He stood at the doorway for a moment, watching her silhouette against the pale curtain light. Something fragile about that image stopped him. For a man used to commanding fear, he suddenly felt unsure, as if one wrong word might shatter the entire room. Finally, he spoke, voice low, controlled. "You never told me where you learned that song." Her hands froze. The silence stretched thin. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "It's an old tune from the place I grew up." Everyone knew it. He didn't believe her. But he didn't push. Not yet. He stepped closer instead, slow, deliberate. Her breath hitched, the kind of sound a person makes when cornered not by danger but by truth. "Your place," he said quietly. "Was it here? In this city?" She nodded too quickly. He noticed. The air between them thickened. He could feel her fear, her exhaustion, the way she held herself together like a secret stitched too tightly to stay closed. And somewhere inside that trembling, he felt something else too. Sorrow. Deep, old, unhealed sorrow. He didn't ask again. He didn't need to. Instead, he turned away, letting the silence finish the conversation. But as he walked out, he heard her whisper, a sound so faint it could have been a prayer. "Please, and don't remember." That night, he couldn't sleep. Every image, every word replayed in his head like a reel he couldn't stop. And when dawn finally touched the mansion, he was still awake, staring at a box he hadn't opened in years. Inside were the remnants of a past he'd buried, his wife's letters, her jewelry, a photograph with a corner burned away. He traced the outline of her face, the curve of her smile, and suddenly it wasn't the past he was seeing. It was her, the waitress, the woman with trembling hands and haunted eyes. His chest tightened. The resemblance was there, not perfect, but close enough to sting. And the lullaby, the same notes, the same tone, the same ache. He shut the box hard, like closing a wound that had just reopened. Later that morning, when he saw her again, something in his gaze had changed. Colder, sharper. She felt it instantly, that shift in the air that only truth can cause. She avoided his eyes, pretending to be busy, but her hands trembled as she placed the breakfast tray before him. He didn't say thank you, didn't even look at her, just let the silence hang, thick and heavy, and yet, as she turned to leave, he said her name softly. Not the formal one, the name she'd used when she first came to work there months ago, when her voice still carried warmth. She froze, then turned slowly. Their eyes met again. This time not as employer and servant, but as two people standing on the edge of something inevitable. He didn't accuse her, didn't question her. He just looked at her long enough for both of them to know. The truth was no longer hidden. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. "Please, don't make me tell you," he didn't reply. Because deep down he already knew, and that knowing, that unspoken truth, was the most dangerous thing either of them had ever felt. The morning passed in silence. The mansion, usually humming with movement, felt like it was holding its breath. Servants whispered in corners, afraid of stepping too loudly. Even the child, usually bright and playful, spoke in half-whispers, as if sensing the storm inside her father's eyes. The boss stayed quiet through breakfast. Every movement was measured. The way he lifted his coffee cup, the way he stared through the window instead of at her. The waitress moved around the table carefully, every step echoing louder in her mind than on the marble floor. She didn't dare look at him, but the weight between them. It grew heavier with each second. When the child left for her lessons upstairs, the room finally went still. He set down his cup, slow and deliberate, and spoke her name, not loud, but with a sharpness that made her freeze. "Sit down," she obeyed. Her knees almost gave out when she sat. The tone in his voice was not anger, it was something far worse. Cold control, the kind that made people confess things they'd buried for years. He leaned forward slightly, hands clasped together on the table. "Tell me something," he said quietly. "Why does my daughter dream about her mother's voice and wake up calling your name?" She didn't answer. Her hands trembled in her lap. He continued, softer, almost to himself. "She says you smell like her. The same perfume, the same warmth, the same songs." Her throat tightened. She couldn't breathe. He looked up finally, and when their eyes met, she saw it. He already knew. He just wanted to hear her say it. "I need to know who you really are," he said. No threat, no anger. Just that calm voice, steady, dangerous, unshakable. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "Because how do you explain the kind of truth that ruins lives?" She wanted to tell him everything. The night she disappeared, the years she hid, the reason she couldn't let their daughter see her face again. But her courage broke under the weight of his gaze. He stood up slowly, pacing once across the room. "You came here months ago," he said, "and I didn't even question it. You worked quietly. You were good with her." He paused. "Too good. Like a mother." Her eyes filled with tears. He turned back, stepping closer. "You think I don't see it?" he said softly. "The way she clings to you, the way you look at her." He stopped right in front of her. "Tell me I'm wrong." She shook her head, the tears finally falling. "You're not wrong," she whispered. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The clock ticked in the distance. And then, his jaw clenched. His eyes closed. "How long?" "Since the night I left," she said, voice breaking. "Why?" His tone cracked, the first sign of emotion leaking through his control. "Why would you disappear and let me bury you?" Her shoulders shook. "I didn't have a choice," she whispered. "That night they came for me. I thought if I stayed, you'd both die." The words hung in the air. Fragile, heavy, impossible. He stepped back, stunned, his face unreadable. "You let me think you were dead." "I had to," she said through tears. It was the only way to keep her safe. He turned away, his hand pressed to his mouth, trying to steady his breathing. Years of pain, grief, and guilt pressed down at once. The woman he'd mourned, the ghost he'd built his rage around, was standing here, alive. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than ever. "Do you have any idea what that did to me?" Her heart broke hearing it, because she did know. Every day, she'd carried that same pain, the same loss, just from the other side of the grave. She rose slowly, standing behind him, wanting to reach out, but afraid to touch him. "Please," she said softly. "I didn't come here to hurt you. I just wanted to see her once, to make sure she was okay." He didn't turn, didn't move, just stood there, breathing hard, shoulders tight, fighting everything inside him. And then, finally he spoke, his voice stripped of all armor. "You shouldn't have come back." Her eyes closed. The words cut deeper than any bullet, but she understood, because love wasn't always soft. Sometimes love was a wound that never stopped bleeding. He left the room without another word. She stood alone, trembling, staring at the door that had just closed between them again. Outside, the sky began to darken, clouds gathering like the ghosts of everything they'd both tried to forget. But this time, there would be no running. The truth was out, and love, no matter how painful, had found its way home. He didn't come home that night. The house stayed silent, every room filled with questions that refused to die. The waitress, no, the woman who used to be his everything, sat awake in the dim light of the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a cup of untouched tea. It had gone cold hours ago. She kept listening for footsteps that never came. Every sound, a door creak, a shifting shadow, made her look up, hoping, fearing. But the mansion was empty, and silence had never felt so loud. Upstairs, the child slept peacefully, her tiny hand clutching a worn handkerchief embroidered with her mother's initials. She didn't know yet. Didn't know that the woman who tucked her in tonight was more than a kind stranger. Didn't know that her father was breaking apart in the dark somewhere, trying to rebuild a truth that had just shattered everything he believed. The woman pressed her palms to her face and breathed deeply. She had imagined this moment so many times, him finding out. But she had never imagined this silence. She thought he'd be angry, yes, furious even, but this cold distance? It was worse. Morning came slow and gray. When she stepped into the hallway, the staff avoided her eyes. Everyone knew something had changed. And when he finally appeared at the top of the stairs, she could barely recognize him. His suit was immaculate, his movements precise. But his eyes, those once warm, once fierce eyes, were quiet. Too quiet. Like the fire had gone out. He didn't say her name, didn't ask her to leave. He just walked past her, as though she were air. That hurt more than any scream. She followed him with her eyes, her heart pounding in her throat. Part of her wanted to run after him, to beg him to understand that she hadn't left out of betrayal. She had left out of love. But love had never been enough to protect them before. And maybe it wasn't enough now. The day stretched long. She went about her tasks in silence, trying to be invisible again. But every corner of that house held a memory. The way he used to look at her when no one was watching. The way his voice softened when he spoke to their daughter. The warmth that used to fill these walls. Now everything felt colder. Late afternoon, a guard came to her with a message. "The boss wants to see you." His office. Her chest tightened. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked down the long corridor, every step heavier than the last. When she entered, he was standing by the window, back turned. Outside, rain had begun to fall, a thin, steady drizzle tracing lines down the glass. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then quietly, without turning around, he spoke. "Why now?" Her lips trembled. "Because I couldn't stay away anymore." He turned then. His face was calm, but his eyes told another story. Pain. Confusion. 1,000 memories fighting to breathe. "You watched me grieve for years," he said, voice low. "You watched me destroy everything in your name, and you never came back." She took a breath that felt like breaking. "I watched you because it was the only way I could live. I had to stay hidden until it was safe for her." He shook his head slowly. "There's no such thing as safe in our world. You should have known that." Her tears finally fell. "I did, but I also knew she deserved a chance to grow up with one parent who still believed in light." That made him pause. For the first time since she'd returned, something flickered in his eyes. Something that looked like recognition. The man he used to be, trapped beneath the one the world had made him become. He exhaled, long and heavy. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she nodded softly. "I didn't come for forgiveness. I came for her. And maybe for the part of you I left behind." The silence that followed wasn't cruel this time. It was searching. He looked at her for a long time, as though trying to decide if she was real. Then he walked past her, stopping at the door. Without turning, he said, "Stay for now. She needs you." Her voice broke. "And what about you?" He paused, just long enough to make her heart ache. Then quietly, so softly it almost wasn't there, he said, "I don't know yet." The door closed behind him. She stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where he'd been. The rain outside grew heavier, and she thought to herself that maybe this was how love survived. Not in the moments of passion, but in the spaces between forgiveness and pain. And somewhere deep down, under all the silence and scars, a small, fragile hope began to breathe again. The days that followed felt unreal, not peaceful, not chaotic, just empty, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for someone to decide what came next. He kept his distance. Every morning, she heard his footsteps in the hallway, measured, deliberate, never stopping near her door. And every night, the same sound again, fading away before it reached the child's room. They spoke only through small gestures. He'd leave a file on her table, documents about the child's schooling, her medication, her safety details. She'd respond with quiet notes, simple practical things. "She ate well today." The nightmares are getting better. Words had become their only bridge, and even that bridge trembled. One evening she found him outside near the garden. The sun was setting behind the stone walls, the air soft and gold. He was sitting on the old wooden bench, the same one where he used to read to their daughter before everything went wrong. She stood there for a while, unsure if she should interrupt. Then softly she said, "She asked about you today." He didn't turn. What did you tell her? That her father is brave and busy, but he loves her. A faint exhale. Not quite a sigh, not quite a laugh. She believes that? She does. A pause. And so do I. He finally looked at her then, not with anger. Not even with pain. Just exhaustion, like a man who's spent too long fighting ghosts. I don't know how to be her father anymore, he said quietly. I only know how to protect her. She stepped closer. You've done both all along. You just forgot what love looked like while you were surviving. He looked away, jaw tight. I buried you, he said. I buried the only woman I ever... His voice broke before the sentence could. He turned away, shoulders trembling. She wanted to touch him, to take his hand and remind him that not every ghost is gone forever. But she didn't. Some wounds needed space before they could heal. Instead, she sat beside him. They didn't speak for a long time. The sound of crickets filled the silence. The world around them kept moving, softly, patiently, like nature itself was giving them permission to breathe. After a while, he said, She looks like you when she smiles. Her heart warmed at the words. Then she must have gotten her stubbornness from you. That earned her the faintest trace of a smile. The first in days. For a brief moment, the air between them shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of it. Later that night, after everyone had gone to sleep, she found herself wandering through the library. Every shelf was lined with pieces of the past, old deals, old sins, old memories. And there, on the lowest shelf, she found something unexpected. A framed photograph, the three of them, before the chaos, before the blood, before the lies that tore them apart. She ran her thumb across the glass, tracing the outline of his smile. He had been younger then, untouched by vengeance, unaware of the storms that would come. And she had been naive enough to believe love could survive anything. Maybe it still could, but not if they kept hiding behind what they used to be. When she turned, he was standing in the doorway, watching her quietly. She didn't jump. She didn't look away. They just stood there. He spoke first. I used to come here every night, he said softly, looking for something to hate. But all I found was this. He nodded toward the photograph. It kept me human. Her voice was barely a whisper. Then maybe it's time to stop surviving and start living again. He took a step closer. Not enough to touch her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence again. The pulse beneath the armor. His voice dropped lower. I don't know how to start. She looked up at him, eyes soft but steady. You already did, the moment you stopped trying to hate me. For a moment, time stood still. The rain had stopped outside. Somewhere in the distance, their daughter stirred in her sleep and murmured a dream. He finally said, I don't promise forgiveness. She nodded. I don't ask for it, a pause, but maybe, he added quietly, I can promise a beginning. Her breath caught. And for the first time since she'd returned, she let herself smile. They stood there, side by side, the distance between them shrinking, not erased, but crossed. One heartbeat at a time. It happened on a morning so ordinary it almost didn't feel real. The sky was pale, soft, the world quiet. Even the mansion, once a fortress of noise and power, felt lighter somehow. The girl was laughing in the garden. Her tiny voice carried through the air, innocent and bright. It was the kind of laughter that healed things without trying. The woman watched from the balcony, a hand resting against the railing. She'd never imagined peace could sound like this. And yet, there it was. Fragile, but alive. Behind her, footsteps approached. Slow, familiar. She didn't need to turn to know it was him. He stopped a few feet away, his voice lower than usual. She's different when you're around, she smiled faintly. So are you. A quiet pause lingered between them. It wasn't awkward anymore, just gentle. He moved closer, standing beside her. For once, his presence didn't feel like shadow and threat. It felt like gravity. Strong, steady, inevitable. They watched the child together, both silent, both remembering the years they'd lost. And then softly he said, I read your letter. Her heart skipped. She had written it days ago and left it in his study, a confession of everything. The truth she'd carried alone. He didn't sound angry. Not broken, just tired. I knew you were alive, he said quietly, even when they told me you were gone. But I buried the hope anyway. It was easier than believing you'd chosen to disappear. Her throat tightened. I didn't choose. They made me. They said if I came back, you'd be the one to die." He turned to her then. There was no disbelief in his eyes, no rage, just sorrow, the kind that comes when understanding finally meets love. "I spent years hunting your ghost," he murmured. "And the whole time you were just trying to keep me alive." Her voice trembled. "I was trying to keep us alive." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The garden shimmered with sunlight. The sound of the child's laughter drifted toward them again, wrapping the air in something pure and wordless. Then, softly, he said, "Maybe we start over. Not as what we were, not as what the world made us, just two people who once forgot how to love." She looked at him, eyes glistening. "Do you think that's possible?" He gave a faint, almost reluctant smile. "I think surviving was the hard part. Loving might just be the easy one." A small breath left her lips, half sigh, half laughter. And in that moment, the years of pain didn't vanish, but they loosened their hold. He reached for her hand, not with the force of a man claiming something, but with the quiet touch of someone who finally understands what it means to hold, not own. Their fingers intertwined. Simple, honest, real. The world didn't stop. The scars didn't fade, but the silence between their heartbeats finally made sense again. Later, the child ran up the steps, holding a flower she'd picked from the garden. "Mommy, Daddy, look," she said, her voice full of sunshine. The woman knelt down, smiling through tears she didn't bother to hide. The man crouched beside them, his large hand brushing gently over the girl's hair. The three of them, together again. Not perfect, not unbroken, but alive. And in the quiet of that moment, the woman realized something. Love was never the problem. Fear was. And now there was nothing left to fear. When the man stood, he looked toward the horizon, his old world, still waiting, still dangerous. He took a slow breath. Then he said the words she'd never thought she'd hear again. "It's over." Not with finality, but with peace. The woman rose beside him, the child's hand still in hers. They watched the sunlight spill across the garden, across the house that had once been built from violence and now, somehow, was learning to hold peace. And as they walked inside together, she whispered one last thought. Not for him, not for the world, but for herself. Maybe the wrong table was never wrong at all. Because that night, the one where she sat down by mistake, the one that changed everything, wasn't the beginning of her disaster. It was the beginning of her becoming, and for the first time in forever, she didn't look back. Some stories don't end with goodbyes. They fade into memory, into heartbeat. She walked into that night thinking it was a mistake, but destiny has never needed directions. Love found her at the wrong table and turned her chaos into meaning. And if you're still listening, maybe your story hasn't ended either. This was Blind Date Disaster, where danger met devotion and love refused to die. But stories never sleep. And somewhere another secret is waking. A new city, a new name, a woman running from the past, and the man sworn to find her. Only on BRD Stories Hub.